The glass shattered against the marble floor of our penthouse, champagne pooling around the designer heels I'd worn to celebrate our 20th anniversary. Charles stood frozen, his phone still clutched in his hand, the screen glowing with a text message that would unravel everything. Transfer confirmed. Another $200K moved to offshore account. She suspects nothing. My hands trembled as I held up the tiny object I'd found buried in my purse that morning, a GPS tracker with a serial number that led me down a rabbit hole of financial records, hidden accounts, and systematic theft. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd been tracking my every move while stealing my inheritance, my savings, everything my father had left me. But let's rewind. 3 months earlier, I was still the perfect wife, the woman who smiled through every humiliation, who believed love meant sacrifice. 3 months earlier, autumn leaves painted Chicago's streets in shades of rust and gold. I sat in our living room overlooking Lake Michigan, surrounded by luxury I no longer recognized as mine. The apartment, the furniture, even the clothes in my closet had been purchased with what Charles called our money, though I'd learned years ago not to ask too many questions about finances. He handled everything, he insisted. It was better that way. I was terrible with numbers, he'd say with that patronizing smile. Better to let him manage our wealth. The morning sun filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the imported Italian marble. I remember thinking how beautiful it all was. How empty. The silence in our home had a weight to it, a thickness that pressed against my chest. Sometimes I'd stand in the middle of our vast living room and count how many steps it took to cross from one side to the other. 43 steps, each one echoing in the cavernous space. Each one a reminder that I lived in a museum, not a home. My morning routine had become mechanical. Wake at 6. Prepare Charles's breakfast exactly how he liked it. Eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee. Watch him leave without a kiss, without a word beyond, "I'll be late tonight." Then spend the day wandering through rooms that felt more like a museum than a home. The cleaning service came Tuesdays and Fridays. The chef prepared meals I rarely ate. I existed in a gilded cage, comfortable and completely hollow. I'd tried to fill the emptiness with purpose. Charity work, volunteering at the art museum, book clubs with other women whose lives seemed just as carefully curated and just as meaningless. But every activity required Charles's approval, his permission. The museum board meeting is on Thursday? That's when I need you to attend the firm's client dinner. Volunteering at the homeless shelter? Darling, that neighborhood isn't safe. What if something happened to you? Each no was delivered with concern, with love, with the unspoken message that he knew better, that I couldn't be trusted to make my own choices. I know you're thinking I should have seen it earlier. Trust me, I ask myself that same question every single day. But manipulation doesn't announce itself with sirens and flashing lights. It creeps in slowly, disguised as protection, as love, as partnership. Charles had spent 2 decades carefully dismantling my confidence, one comment at a time. You're so creative, darling. But numbers just aren't your strength. Let me handle the investments. You focus on making our home beautiful. Your father would want me to protect his legacy for you. Those words. Your father would want me to protect his legacy for you. He'd use them like a weapon, knowing exactly how they'd land. My father had been my hero, my protector, my guide. Losing him had torn a hole in my world that never quite healed, and Charles had stepped into that void, promising to honor Dad's memory, to carry forward his dreams. How could I have known that honoring meant stealing, that protecting meant destroying everything Dad had built? My father. God, how I missed him. He'd built a fortune in commercial real estate, properties scattered across the Midwest, each one a testament to his immigrant dream. When he died 5 years ago, he left everything to me, his only child. $12 million in assets, property, investments. I remember the day the lawyer read the will. Charles squeezed my hand, whispered how proud Dad would be, how we'd honor his memory together. Within 6 months, he'd convinced me to consolidate everything under joint accounts. For tax purposes, he said. For estate planning. For us. I remember the conversation like it was yesterday. We were sitting in that same living room, documents spread across the coffee table. Charles had hired an estate planning attorney, Someone from his firm, someone who worked for him, not me. The lawyer had explained, in language designed to confuse rather than clarify, that joint accounts would streamline the estate process and provide tax advantages. I'd asked questions, tried to understand, but every answer led to more jargon, more complexity. Finally, exhausted and grieving, I'd signed. Charles had taken me to dinner afterward to my favorite restaurant, ordered champagne. To us, he'd toasted. To our future. Your father would be so proud of how you're handling this. Proud. The word tasted like ash now. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning in September. I'd gone to the bank to withdraw cash for a charity event, something I rarely did. The teller, a young woman with kind eyes, looked at my account and frowned. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm showing a balance of $8,000. Will that be sufficient? 8,000. Not 80,000. Not the hundreds of thousands that should have been there from my quarterly dividends alone. I laughed it off, told her there must be a mistake, made some excuse about checking with my husband, but my hand shook as I signed the withdrawal slip. The walk home from the bank took me through Millennium Park. I needed air, needed space to think before facing Charles. I sat on a bench near the Cloudgate sculpture, watching tourists take photos, couples holding hands, children laughing. Normal people living normal lives. When had my life stopped being normal? When had I become this woman who didn't even know her own bank balance? I called my friend Linda from that bench. We'd known each other since college. Before Charles, before the money, before I'd become someone I didn't recognize. Lynn, I said when she answered, my voice shaking. Can we meet for coffee? Today? Now? She heard something in my tone, didn't ask questions, just said, give me 30 minutes, the usual place. The usual place was a small cafe in Wicker Park, far from Charles's downtown office, far from our wealthy neighbors and their judging eyes. Linda arrived wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair in a messy bun, looking real and solid and safe. She took one look at my face and ordered us both large coffees and chocolate croissants. Comfort food. Talk, she said simply. And I did. Not about the missing money, not yet. I wasn't ready to voice that fear aloud. But I talked about the loneliness, the isolation, the way I'd become a ghost in my own life. Linda listened, her expression growing darker with each word. When I finally stopped, she reached across the table and gripped my hand. Margaret, she said quietly, you know this isn't normal, right? The way he controls everything, the way you need permission to live your own life. That's not love. That's not partnership. She paused, choosing her words carefully. That's abuse. The word hung between us. Abuse. I wanted to deny it, to defend Charles, to explain that she didn't understand. But I couldn't. Because deep down, in a place I'd been afraid to examine, I knew she was right. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went into Charles's office. The door was always locked, his private sanctuary, he called it, but I knew where he kept the spare key. Hidden behind a framed photo of us on our wedding day, younger, hopeful, strangers to the people we'd become. My heart hammered as I turned the key, half expecting an alarm to sound, security to burst through the door. But there was only silence and the hum of his computer. The office smelled like him. Expensive cologne, leather, and something else. Power. Control. I stood in the doorway for a moment, my conscience warring with my fear. This was crossing a line, violating his privacy. But then I thought about the bank balance. $8,000 where there should have been hundreds of thousands. My privacy had already been violated. My trust had already been betrayed. I didn't know what I was looking for. Bank statements, I suppose. Some explanation for the discrepancy. What I found instead was a filing cabinet organized with military precision, folders labeled with dates, account numbers, property addresses. I pulled one at random. Inside were documents for the sale of one of my father's buildings, a warehouse in Milwaukee that had been in our family for 30 years, sold 18 months ago for $2 million. I'd never been told, never signed anything. Or had I? I remembered stacks of papers Charles would bring home, tax documents. He'd say, "Just sign here, darling." Had I unknowingly authorized the liquidation of my own inheritance? My hands shook as I photographed the documents with my phone, trying to keep the camera steady. Each click of the shutter felt like a small act of rebellion, of reclamation. I went through folder after folder, photographing everything. Sales records, transfer documents, account statements for banks I'd never heard of in countries I'd never visited. The metallic taste of fear filled my mouth as I dug deeper. More sales, more transfers. Properties I'd inherited sold off piece by piece, the proceeds flowing into accounts I didn't recognize. Foreign banks, investment firms in the Cayman Islands, Delaware shell corporations with names that meant nothing to me. My father's legacy, my security, systematically dismantled and hidden away. But where? And why? And then I found the notebook. Leather-bound, expensive, tucked in the back of the bottom drawer. I almost missed it. Inside, in Charles's precise handwriting, were notes, calculations, plans. M's Milwaukee property, market value 1, 2M, can claim maintenance costs reduced actual value to $800K. Difference to offshore account number 3. M's dividend account, transfer $50K monthly. She never checks statements. If questioned about father's estate, gaslight poor market performance, her lack of financial knowledge. If questioned, gaslight, written in black and white. A strategy. A plan to manipulate me, to make me doubt my own reality. I photographed every page, my vision blurring with tears. How long had he been planning this? Years? From the beginning? I heard the elevator ding in the hallway. Charles was home early. Panic seized me. I shoved the folders back, locked the office, replaced the key, and somehow made it to the bedroom before he walked through the door. "Margaret?" His voice carried through the apartment, smooth as aged bourbon. "Darling, where are you?" I stood in front of the mirror, forcing my face into a mask of normalcy, practicing the smile I'd perfected over 20 years of marriage. "Just changing for dinner," I called back, my voice steadier than I felt. When I emerged, he was pouring himself a scotch, his tie already loosened, the picture of a successful man relaxing in his domain. He looked handsome, I realized with a jolt. Still attractive at 49, with silver threading through his dark hair, laugh lines around his eyes. To anyone else, he'd look like a catch, a successful attorney, wealthy, charismatic. They'd wonder what he saw in me, the quiet wife who never quite fit into his glittering world. They didn't see what happened behind closed doors, the subtle put-downs, the financial control, the systematic erasure of my identity. "How was your day?" I asked. The question automatic, expected. He launched into a story about a difficult client, a deal that was taking longer than anticipated. I nodded in the right places, made sympathetic sounds, all while my mind raced through what I'd discovered. That night, lying beside him in our king-sized bed, I felt like I was sleeping next to a stranger. Or worse, a predator. His breathing was deep and even, peaceful, while I stared at the ceiling, watching headlights from the street below paint shadows across the walls. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by dreams of my father. In one, he was showing me his Milwaukee warehouse, pointing out the solid construction, the potential for growth. "This will take care of you, Margaret," he said. "Long after I'm gone, this will keep you safe." In the dream, I watched as the building crumbled, brick by brick, while Charles stood beside me counting money. I woke, gasping, sweat-soaked, at 4 a.m. Charles didn't stir. The next morning, I found the tracker. I'd been searching through my purse for my lipstick when my fingers brushed against something small and hard wedged in the lining. At first, I thought it was a loose button or a piece of broken jewelry. But when I pulled it out, I recognized it immediately from a crime show I'd watched. A GPS tracker, no bigger than a quarter, its tiny light blinking green. My blood ran cold. How long had it been there? Weeks? Months? Years? I thought about all my movements, the coffee shop where I met my friend Linda, the bookstore I browsed on lonely afternoons, the park bench where I sometimes sat and cried. He'd been watching, tracking, monitoring. The violation of it hit me in waves. Every private moment I'd thought I had, every small freedom I'd carved out, had been observed, recorded. He knew when I met Linda. He knew about my trips to the bookstore, the hours I spent wandering through fiction aisles, losing myself in other people's stories because my own had become unbearable. He knew about the bench in Lincoln Park where I'd sit and watch the lake, sometimes crying, sometimes just existing in the one space that felt like mine. Except it wasn't mine. None of it was. I wanted to scream, to smash the tracker against the wall, to confront Charles immediately, demanding answers. But something stopped me. Maybe it was Linda's voice in my head, warning me about abusers and escalation. Maybe it was survival instinct, some primal understanding that showing my hand now would be dangerous. Or maybe it was something simpler, colder, rage crystallizing into strategy. But here's what Charles hadn't counted on. Every device leaves a digital fingerprint. The tracker had a serial number etched into its casing, tiny but legible. I photographed it with shaking hands, then carefully placed it back exactly where I'd found it. If he was watching me, I couldn't let him know I'd discovered his surveillance. I had to play the role of the oblivious wife for just a little longer, long enough to understand the full scope of what he'd done, long enough to plan my response. Because a betrayal this deep doesn't heal, it scars over, and sometimes those scars become armor. I studied my reflection in the bathroom mirror, really looked at myself for the first time in years. When had I gotten so thin? My collarbones protruded sharply, my cheeks hollow. I'd been disappearing, literally fading away while Charles grew more prosperous, more confident, feeding off what he'd stolen from me. Not anymore. I was done disappearing. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever discovered a truth so devastating that it literally changed your perception of reality? Where everything you thought you knew suddenly shifted and you realized you'd been living in an illusion? That's where I was. 20 years of marriage, and I didn't know the man sleeping beside me. I didn't know my own financial situation. I didn't even have autonomy over my own movements. If this resonates with you, if you felt this powerlessness, know that you're not alone, and know that it gets better. But first, it gets worse. The next day, I did something I'd never done before. I lied to my husband. I told him I was meeting Linda for lunch, our usual Wednesday routine. Instead, I took the train to a part of town I'd never visited, a neighborhood where pawn shops and check-cashing places lined the streets. I found what I was looking for in a small electronics store wedged between a bodega and a laundromat. The owner, a middle-aged man with oil-stained fingers, took one look at the photo of my tracker and nodded knowingly. "Commercial grade," he said, pulling up information on his computer. "Not the kind of thing you buy at Best Buy. This is professional surveillance equipment. Serial number traces back to a company that sells exclusively to private investigators and law enforcement." He looked at me over his reading glasses. "Ma'am, whoever put this on you wanted to know exactly where you were, every minute of every day. These things store location data for months. With the right software, they could pull up a complete history of everywhere you've been." The shop was small, cluttered with outdated electronics and cables snaking across every surface. It smelled like dust and solder and desperation. I fit right in. "Is there any way to access that data?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The owner studied me for a long moment, and I saw recognition in his eyes. He'd seen women like me before. Tracked, controlled, hunted. "Not legally," he said carefully. "Not without the access codes. But I can tell you that whoever's monitoring this device is checking your location every 30 minutes. Like clockwork. That's obsessive-level surveillance, ma'am. That's not normal concern. That's control." I already knew that. But hearing it stated so plainly from a stranger who had no stake in my marriage, no reason to lie or gaslight or manipulate, made it real in a way my own suspicions hadn't. "What would you do?" I asked. "If someone was tracking you like this?" He thought for a moment. "Document everything, build a case, and be very, very careful. People who go to these lengths don't like losing control. They escalate." He paused. "Do you have somewhere safe you can go? Someone who knows what you're dealing with?" I thought about Linda, about the lawyer I'd been too afraid to call, about the life I'd been too scared to reclaim. "I'm working on it," I said. My stomach lurched. "Can you tell who purchased it?" He shook his head. Would need a warrant for that, but I can tell you it was activated 8 months ago, and it's still pinging a server every 30 minutes. 8 months. I tried to remember what was happening in our lives 8 months ago. February. Charles had been stressed about work, or so he said. We'd had a rare argument about money, me asking if we could afford to help my cousin with medical bills, him snapping that I didn't understand our financial situation. I'd backed down, as always. Had that been the trigger? Had my small assertion of independence prompted him to escalate his control? I thanked the shop owner and stepped back into the cold Chicago wind. My next stop was the public library, a place I knew Charles wouldn't track as unusual. I'd been there dozens of times over the years. I found a computer in the back corner and began the digital excavation that would consume the next 2 weeks of my life. Using the information I'd photographed from Charles's office, I started pulling public records. Property sales are public information. So are corporate filings. So are court documents. The library was nearly empty on a Wednesday afternoon. A few students working on assignments, an elderly man reading newspapers, a homeless woman sleeping in one of the comfortable chairs. The librarian, a woman about my age with kind eyes and reading glasses on a chain, asked if I needed help. I thanked her but declined. How could I explain what I was looking for? Evidence of my own financial murder. I started with the Milwaukee warehouse, the first property I'd found evidence of. Public records showed the sale had indeed gone through 18 months ago. Purchase price: $2 million. Buyer: Whitmore Holdings, LLC. I'd never heard of it. A quick search showed the company had been incorporated in Delaware 3 years ago. President and sole shareholder: Charles Whitmore. He'd sold my property to himself. The realization hit me like ice water. This wasn't just theft. This was premeditated, calculated, systematic. He'd created an entire corporate structure years in advance, filed paperwork, paid incorporation fees, built the infrastructure for his crime long before executing it. This level of planning spoke to something darker than opportunistic greed. This was cold, methodical, patient. How many nights had he lain beside me planning this? How many dinners had we shared while he mentally calculated how to dismantle my father's legacy? I dug deeper into Whitmore Holdings, LLC. The registered agent was an attorney I didn't recognize based in Wilmington, Delaware, the standard setup for people hiding assets. Delaware's corporate privacy laws made it nearly impossible to trace ownership without a subpoena. But Charles had made one mistake. He'd listed a Chicago address for service of process, an office building in the Loop. I cross-referenced the address with Google Maps. The building housed dozens of businesses, including several law firms, including Charles's firm. He'd been bold enough, arrogant enough to use his own office address. Perhaps he thought no one would ever look. Or perhaps he'd grown so confident in my ignorance that he didn't bother being careful anymore. That arrogance would be his downfall. What I uncovered made my father's $12 million inheritance look like pocket change. Charles had been systematically looting our assets for years, but not just spending the money. He'd been investing it, growing it, building his own separate empire. Properties in Miami, a portfolio of tech stocks, ownership stakes in 3 different startups. All in his name alone or hidden behind corporate shells I'd never heard of. The man who claimed we had to be careful with expenses, who'd made me feel guilty for buying a new coat, had accumulated a personal net worth approaching $20 million. My money, my father's legacy, stolen and transformed into Charles Whitmore's kingdom. Each discovery felt like a physical blow. A property in South Beach, purchased for cash 2 years ago. $1.8 million, my money. A stake in a tech startup that had recently gone public. Original investment, $3 million. Current value, over $8 million. My money. An investment account at Morgan Stanley, balance showing $12.4 million in various stocks and bonds. My money. All of it, every single dollar, traced back to the properties my father had left me, to the accounts I'd foolishly signed over, to the inheritance Charles had stolen. But the worst discovery came when I cross-referenced the dates. The timing wasn't random. It had started almost immediately after my father's death, accelerating after I'd signed over joint control of the accounts. Every major transfer, every property sale, had been authorized with my forged signature. I found copies of the documents in the county records office. My name, scrawled in handwriting that looked like mine but wasn't quite right. He'd been practicing my signature, planning this for years. I printed everything the library printer would allow, spending $40 in printing fees, feeding quarters into the machine like I was playing a slot machine. Except instead of hoping for a jackpot, I was documenting my own destruction. The librarian noticed my pile of papers, my shaking hands, my tears. She brought me a box of tissues and a bottle of water, asked quietly if I was okay. I lied, said I was fine, just dealing with some estate issues. She nodded, not believing me but respecting my privacy. As I was leaving, she pressed a business card into my hand. "Women's Legal Aid," she whispered. "They helped my sister. Free consultations." I tucked it into my purse, next to the tracker that was still monitoring my every move. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. Because here's what I had learned about men like Charles. They're only dangerous when they feel threatened. As long as he believed I was the same passive, trusting Margaret, he'd continue with his routine. He'd make mistakes. He'd get comfortable. And I'd be watching, documenting, building a case that would be absolutely ironclad. I went home and cooked his favorite dinner, pot roast with roasted vegetables. I poured his wine. I asked about his day. And when he kissed me goodnight, I kissed him back, tasting ash and betrayal, forcing myself not to recoil. The performance required was excruciating. Smiling at his jokes, laughing at the right moments, pretending interest in his stories about work, about colleagues I'd never meet, about a life I wasn't truly part of. All while knowing what I knew. All while planning his downfall with every fiber of my being. "You seem different," he said that night, studying me across the dinner table. My heart stopped. Had I given something away? Let my mask slip? "Different how?" I asked, keeping my voice light, curious. "I don't know. Happier, maybe, more relaxed." He reached across the table, squeezed my hand. "It's nice. I've been worried about you, darling. You've seemed so stressed lately." The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. He'd been stealing from me, tracking me, controlling every aspect of my life, and he had the nerve to express concern about my stress levels. I wanted to laugh, to scream, to throw my wine in his face. Instead, I smiled. "I've just been trying to find more contentment, to appreciate what we have." Each word was carefully chosen. Each word was true, in a way he'd never understand. Over the following weeks, I became someone new. Or perhaps I became who I'd always been before Charles convinced me I was helpless. I opened a separate bank account at a different institution under my maiden name, something I legally could still use. I started diverting small amounts of household money, cash back from grocery shopping, change from errands. Nothing he'd notice, but enough to build my own emergency fund. I consulted with 3 different divorce attorneys, each in different suburbs, paying cash for initial consultations. I learned about asset tracing, forensic accounting, and the penalties for financial fraud in Illinois. The first attorney was a shark in a designer suit. He looked at my preliminary evidence and whistled low. "Mrs. Whitmore, if what you're telling me is accurate, your husband is looking at serious criminal charges. Not just divorce court, federal fraud, forgery, possibly racketeering if he's been using these shell companies for other purposes." He quoted me a retainer of $50,000. I thanked him and left. The second attorney was younger, hungrier. She specialized in high-net-worth divorces and had a reputation for being ruthless. "We can destroy him," she said eagerly, leaning forward in her chair. "Forensic accountants, private investigators, the works. We'll find every penny he's hidden and take him for everything he's worth." Her eagerness made me uncomfortable. I wasn't looking for someone who enjoyed the battle. I was looking for someone who understood the stakes. The third attorney was different. Her name was Rebecca Chen, and her office was modest, professional, almost austere. She listened to my story without interrupting, made notes on a legal pad, asked clarifying questions. When I finished, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said quietly, "what you're describing is financial abuse. It's a form of domestic violence that often goes unrecognized because there are no physical scars, but it's just as devastating, just as dangerous. I felt tears prick my eyes at the validation, at finally being seen. "Can you help me?" "Yes," she said simply. "But you need to understand what you're getting into. If we pursue this criminally, your husband will likely go to prison. Your marriage will be over, obviously. His reputation, his career, everything he's built will be destroyed. There's no going back from this. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about the tracker in my purse, the forged signatures, the stolen inheritance, the 20 years of manipulation and control. "Yes," I said, "I'm prepared." I also started documenting everything. I bought a small camera disguised as a pen and recorded our conversations. I photographed every document I could access in his office, building a digital archive of his crimes. I tracked his movements the way he'd tracked mine, noting the pattern of his absences, the nights he claimed to be working late. And here's what surveillance revealed. My husband had a girlfriend, a 28-year-old associate at his firm named Brittany. They met every Thursday at a hotel in the Loop, the same hotel where we'd spent our wedding night 20 years ago. The audacity of it should have hurt more than it did. But by then, my heart had gone cold. I discovered the affair almost by accident. Following him wasn't part of my plan. But one Thursday evening, curiosity got the better of me. He'd said he'd be working late, depositions running long. I called the firm's main number and asked for him. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said. "Mr. Whitmore left at 4:30. Can I take a message?" 4:30. It was now 7. Where had he been for 2.5 hours? I took a taxi to his office building, paranoid about the tracker in my purse giving away my location. I watched from a coffee shop across the street. At 7:30, Charles emerged from the building with a young woman. Tall, blonde, beautiful in the way of expensive professional grooming. She wore a navy suit that hugged her curves, heels that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. They walked together toward the hotel district, not touching but intimate in their proximity, the way their heads bent toward each other. I followed at a distance, my heart hammering. Watched them enter the Ambassador Hotel through the revolving brass doors. The same hotel where we'd stayed on our wedding night, where Charles had carried me over the threshold of our honeymoon suite, where we'd made promises we were too young to understand. I didn't follow them inside. I didn't need to. The pieces fit together with sickening clarity. The Thursday evening depositions, the hotel where sentiment meant nothing to him, the young associate he'd mentioned casually in conversation. Brilliant legal mind, he'd said. Real future at the firm. He was stealing my money to finance his affair, building his empire on my father's legacy so he could leave me for a younger model. I know some of you are wondering why I didn't just leave, pack a bag and walk out. But it wasn't about the marriage anymore. That had died years ago, maybe from the beginning. This was about justice, about making sure that Charles Whitmore didn't just lose a wife. He needed to lose everything, his reputation, his stolen fortune, his freedom. Because if I simply divorced him, with joint accounts and no proof of fraud, I'd get half at best, maybe less, depending on how skilled his lawyers were. No, I needed him exposed, prosecuted, destroyed. Only then could I reclaim not just my father's money, but my own identity. The trap I was setting required patience. It required me to be a better actor than I'd ever been. Some nights, lying beside him, I wanted to scream, to claw at his face, to demand answers. But I breathed through the rage, channeled it into planning, and waited for the perfect moment. That moment came in the form of an invitation. Charles's firm was hosting their annual gala, a black tie event where Chicago's elite gathered to congratulate themselves on their success. Partners, clients, city officials. Everyone who mattered in Charles's world would be there, including Brittany, I presumed. And that's when I'd make my move. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before the gala, before the public reckoning, I needed one more thing. Proof so undeniable that even Charles's expensive lawyers couldn't spin it. I needed him on record admitting what he'd done. And that meant pushing him, just a little, to see how he'd react when cornered. The question was, could I provoke a confession without revealing that I knew? Could I play the concerned wife questioning finances without triggering his suspicion? It was a dangerous game. But then again, I'd been playing dangerous games for 20 years. I just hadn't realized it until now. And as I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror that night, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Harder. Colder. Ready for war. I confronted him on a Sunday morning, carefully calculated to seem spontaneous. We were having breakfast, rare for us, when I casually mentioned that I'd run into an old friend whose father had recently passed. "She's dealing with the estate," I said, buttering my toast with affected nonchalance. It made me think about Dad's properties, the Milwaukee warehouse specifically. I was thinking maybe we should visit it, see if any updates are needed before we pass it down to our kids someday. We didn't have kids. That was another dream that had died slowly over the years. First, Charles said we should wait until his career was established. Then it was never the right time. Then my biological clock ran out, and suddenly we were that couple who smiled tightly when asked about children and changed the subject. Another thing he'd stolen from me. Another future erased. Charles's hand froze halfway to his coffee cup. Just for a second, but I caught it. "The warehouse?" His voice was carefully neutral. "Why would you want to visit that old place?" I shrugged, playing my part. "Nostalgia, I suppose." Dad loved that building. He bought it with his first real profit, always said it represented the American dream. I haven't been there since the funeral. "Don't you think we should check on it?" The muscle in his jaw twitched. "Margaret, we sold that property 2 years ago. I know I told you. The maintenance costs were astronomical and the neighborhood was declining. We got a fair price, invested the proceeds wisely." He reached across the table, covering my hand with his. His palm was sweating. "Darling, this is exactly why I handle the finances. You get so emotional about these things, you can't see the practical side." There it was, the gaslighting I'd endured for years, refined to an art form. Make me doubt my own memory. Make me feel foolish for caring. Make me grateful that he shouldered the burden of adult decisions. I let my face crumple, let tears well in my eyes. "You're right," I whispered. "I'm sorry. I just miss Dad sometimes. I know you're taking care of everything. I trust you completely." The relief on his face was palpable. He'd dodged the bullet, or so he thought. He stood, kissed my forehead like I was a child. "That's my girl. Now, I have to run into the office for a few hours. Conference call with the West Coast. I'll be home for dinner." I watched him leave, then went to my laptop and pulled up the recording from the pen camera I'd positioned on the breakfast table. Clear audio. His admission that he'd sold the property without my knowledge. It wasn't a full confession, but it was a start. Over the next week, I pushed a little harder each time, asked about specific properties, mentioned running into the accountant who'd handled my father's estate. He seemed surprised when I said we'd consolidated everything, I told Charles one evening. Asked if I was sure that was wise from a tax perspective. Charles's response was immediate and aggressive. "That accountant is an old fool who doesn't understand modern portfolio management. If he contacts you again, refer him to me. Better yet, give me his number. I'll have a conversation with him about client confidentiality." The threat in his voice was barely veiled. I filed it away with all the other evidence. Each conversation, each slip, each moment of mask dropping when he thought he'd successfully manipulated me. Rebecca Chen had been right. I was documenting not just fraud, but a pattern of coercive control, of financial abuse, of systematic gaslighting designed to make me doubt my own reality. But the real break came when I accidentally left my phone unlocked with my bank app open. Charles predictably checked it when I was in the shower. I'd staged the account to show I'd been researching my father's estate, searching for property records, looking up old financial documents. When I emerged, he was pacing the bedroom, phone clutched in his hand. "What the hell is this, Margaret? Why are you digging into old financial records? What are you looking for?" His anger was palpable. This was Charles without the mask, without the smooth lawyer facade. His face was flushed, a vein throbbing in his temple. For a moment, I felt genuine fear. This man could hurt me, would hurt me if he thought I was a threat to his carefully constructed empire. I'd prepared for this moment, rehearsed it in my head 100 times. I broke down, sobbing, telling him I was worried about our future, our retirement. That Linda's husband had lost money in bad investments, and it terrified me. That I just wanted to understand where we stood financially. I know I'm stupid about money, I cried, hating myself for the words even as I used them strategically. But we're getting older, Charles. I need to know we're secure. Please just show me. Help me understand. His face cycled through emotions: anger, calculation, relief, condescension. Finally, he pulled me into his arms, stroking my hair like I was a nervous pet. Oh, darling. Of course you're worried. Let me show you something. He walked to his office, and for a wild moment, I thought he might actually come clean. Instead, he pulled up fabricated documents on his computer. Account statements showing modest savings. Investment portfolios with reasonable returns. See? We're fine. Your father's money was invested wisely. We have plenty for retirement. You don't need to worry. Every word was a lie. Every document was fake. And I had it all on video from the camera I'd hidden in his office 3 days earlier. I cried tears of gratitude against his chest, thanking him for being so patient with me, while inside my rage crystallized into something cold and sharp. He thought I was his fool, his mark, his obedient little wife who'd swallow whatever story he fed her. But fools don't spend weeks building criminal cases. Fools don't document fraud with the precision of a prosecutor. And fools certainly don't set traps that will cost their husbands everything. That night, I made a decision. The gala was 2 weeks away. Between now and then, I needed to move my evidence somewhere safe. I rented a safe deposit box at a bank across town, filled it with copies of everything I'd collected. Original documents, hard drives, recordings, photographs. I gave my attorney a sealed envelope with instructions to open it if anything happened to me. Was I paranoid? Maybe. But Charles had already proven he was willing to commit fraud on a massive scale. If he discovered what I knew, would he escalate to violence? I didn't know, and I wasn't willing to find out. Rebecca had listened to my concerns without dismissing them. Financial abusers rarely become physically violent, she'd said carefully. But there's always a risk, especially if they feel cornered. You're doing the right thing. Document everything. Keep copies in multiple locations. And if you ever feel unsafe, if your instincts tell you to get out, listen to them. Your life is worth more than any amount of money or justice. Her words haunted me as I lay awake that night, listening to Charles snore beside me. Was I putting myself in danger? Probably. But the alternative? Continuing to live this lie, letting him get away with everything he'd stolen, felt like a different kind of death. A slower one. The death of dignity. Of self. I also did something that surprised even me. I reached out to Brittany. Not confrontationally, just a simple message through LinkedIn, congratulating her on a recent professional achievement Charles had mentioned. She responded warmly, thanking me, saying how wonderful it was to work with Charles, what an amazing mentor he was. I responded that we should have lunch sometime, get to know each other since Charles spoke so highly of her. She agreed enthusiastically. The irony was delicious. She had no idea I knew, no idea that her mentor was a criminal, no idea that in 2 weeks her career would implode alongside his. We met for lunch at a trendy spot in River North. Brittany was even more beautiful in person, with perfect skin and bright eyes and the kind of confidence that comes from being young and ambitious and naive enough to believe the world is fair. She ordered a salad and sparkling water, talked enthusiastically about her cases, her goals, her admiration for Charles. He's just such an incredible attorney, she gushed. So strategic, so brilliant. I feel so lucky to work with him. I nodded, smiled, played the role of the supportive wife who was delighted her husband was mentoring young talent. He speaks very highly of you too, I said. He says you have a real future in law. I paused, studying her. You must spend a lot of time together, working late on cases and such. Something flickered in her eyes. Guilt, awareness, but it was gone quickly, replaced by professional enthusiasm. Oh yes, we've been working on the Henderson case together. Very complex litigation. Lots of late nights. The Henderson case had settled 3 months ago. I knew because Charles had celebrated with expensive scotch. So those late nights were something else entirely. I wanted to tell her, to warn her that she was being used, that men like Charles collect young women the way others collect art. But she'd learn soon enough. We all do eventually. But here's what kept me up at night. As much as I wanted to destroy Charles, as justified as my rage was, I was still terrified. What if I miscalculated? What if his lawyers were better than mine? What if I ended up not just divorced but penniless, destroyed, while he walked away unscathed? The fear was paralyzing sometimes, and I'd wake up at 3 a.m., heart racing, wondering if I should just take what I could and run. But then I'd remember my father. Immigrant from Ireland, worked 3 jobs to buy his first property, built an empire through decades of sacrifice. He trusted me to protect his legacy, and Charles had pissed it away on his own greed and his mistress's lingerie. No, I wasn't running. I was finishing this. But I needed insurance, one final piece that would guarantee my victory. And I found it in the most unexpected place. Charles's business partner, Marcus Trent. They'd founded the firm together 15 years ago, but their relationship had grown strained. Charles had been buying him out gradually, using what I now knew was my stolen money. I invited Marcus to coffee, told him I was planning a surprise for Charles's 50th birthday, wanted his input. What I actually wanted was information. Marcus met me at a Starbucks in the financial district, far from the firm's office. He was a tall man with silver hair and sharp eyes that assessed me carefully as he sat down. We made small talk about the weather, about the firm's recent successes. Then he leaned back in his chair and said quietly, "Margaret, you're not planning a birthday surprise. What's this really about?" I'd been prepared to dance around the truth, but his directness caught me off guard. And maybe I was tired of lying, tired of pretending. So I took a risk. "I think Charles has been stealing from me, from my inheritance, and I think it might affect the firm. I thought you should know." Marcus's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, confirmation of something he'd already suspected. "Tell me," he said simply. Marcus, it turned out, had his own suspicions. "Your husband's been moving a lot of money lately," he said carefully. "Offshore accounts, shell companies. I've asked questions, but he tells me it's all above board. Personal investments, not firm business. But Margaret, between us, something feels off." I played the concerned wife. "Should I be worried?" He hesitated, then leaned forward. "I think you should hire your own accountant. Someone who works for you, not for both of you. Just to review your personal finances, make sure everything's documented correctly." It was the opening I needed. I confessed carefully that I'd been having similar concerns, that I'd found discrepancies, that I was terrified of what it might mean. Marcus's face hardened. If Charles has been using marital assets for personal gain without disclosure, that's not just unethical, it's fraud. It could expose the firm to liability. And there it was, the final nail. Because Marcus wasn't going to protect Charles. He was going to protect the firm, which meant he needed Charles gone as much as I did. "There's more," Marcus said, his voice dropping even lower. "Charles has been courting our biggest clients behind my back, trying to convince them to move to a new firm he's planning to start, using firm resources to build his own book of business. I've been documenting it, but I needed proof. If what you're telling me about the financial fraud is true, if he's been using stolen money to fund his buyout of my shares..." He trailed off, but the implication was clear. Charles had betrayed everyone, his wife, his partner, his firm. We formed an unlikely alliance. Marcus would quietly audit the firm's records, looking for any overlap between Charles's personal dealings and company finances. I would provide my evidence of the stolen inheritance. Together, we'd present a case that was both civil and criminal, financial fraud and embezzlement. The gala, we decided, wasn't just going to be Charles's social humiliation. It would be the night the district attorney's office received a comprehensive file detailing his crimes. Let him shake hands and drink champagne while the walls closed in. "Why the gala?" I asked Marcus. "Why not just turn him in now?" Marcus smiled grimly. "Because Charles cares about appearances more than anything. His reputation, his status. Taking him down publicly, in front of everyone he's tried to impress, everyone he's manipulated. That's justice. That's poetic. I understood. This wasn't just about legal consequences. It was about exposing the truth in the most devastating way possible. About making sure everyone who'd admired Charles, who'd trusted him, who'd believed his carefully constructed facade, saw exactly who he really was. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I moved through each day in a haze of anxiety and anticipation. Charles noticed nothing, too absorbed in preparations for the gala. It was the firm's biggest event of the year, a chance to impress clients and recruit new talent. He was on the planning committee, spent hours obsessing over details, the venue, the menu, the guest list. Every element had to be perfect. During those 2 weeks, I had moments of paralyzing doubt. Late at night, I'd lie awake and wonder if I was making a terrible mistake. What if the evidence wasn't as solid as I thought? What if Charles's lawyers found loopholes? What if I ended up looking like the vindictive, unstable wife he'd always subtly suggested I was? I called Rebecca Chen at 2 a.m. one night, hands shaking, voice breaking. "What if this destroys me instead of him?" I asked. She listened patiently to my fears, then said something I'll never forget. "Margaret, you've already been destroyed. What you're doing now is rebuilding. And yes, it's terrifying. Yes, it might get worse before it gets better. But staying silent, staying trapped, that's not protection. That's slow death. You're choosing life. That takes courage." Her words became my mantra. I was choosing life. I was choosing truth. I was choosing myself finally, after 20 years of choosing Charles. I also spent time preparing for what would come after. I researched apartments, looking at smaller places in neighborhoods I'd always loved, but Charles had deemed unsuitable. I made lists of things I'd do once I was free. Simple things. Take a pottery class, learn to cook something other than Charles's preferred meals. Travel somewhere I wanted to go, not where Charles had business. The list grew longer each day, a roadmap to a future that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. "This is my moment," he told me one evening, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "Senior partner announcement happens at the gala. It's finally coming together, Margaret. Everything I've worked for." Everything he'd stolen for, he meant. But I just smiled and told him I was proud. Played the supportive wife one last time. "I'm so happy for you," I said. And there was truth in those words, though not the truth he heard. I was happy. Happy that his arrogance had blinded him. Happy that he'd focused so intently on his moment of triumph that he'd missed the trap closing around him. Happy that in a few days, justice would finally be served. The night of the gala, I dressed in red. A blood-red gown that hugged every curve, diamonds at my throat, my hair swept up in an elegant chignon. Charles actually paused when he saw me. "You look stunning," he said. And for a moment I saw a flash of the man I'd married. Then I remembered the tracker, the forged signatures, the offshore accounts, and I smiled my brightest smile. "I wanted to look perfect for your big night." He preened, completely oblivious. The dress had cost $3,000, charged to our joint credit card. Charles would have had a fit if he'd known, would have lectured me about frivolous spending. But tonight, I wanted to look like I belonged in his world. Wanted him to see what he was losing. Wanted everyone to remember how we looked together, the perfect couple, moments before everything fell apart. The limo ride to the venue was surreal. Charles scrolled through his phone, responding to last-minute work emails, while I watched the city slide past the tinted windows. Chicago had been my home for 30 years, but I felt like I was seeing it for the first time. The lights, the energy, the promise of something new. After tonight, my life would never be the same. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The ballroom was everything Chicago high society aspired to be. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, a string quartet playing in the corner. I saw Brittany across the room, poured into a black dress that screamed, "Mistress trying too hard." She caught my eye and waved. I waved back, thinking how satisfying it would be when she realized I'd known all along. Charles worked the room, shaking hands, laughing at jokes. The picture of success. I played my role too, the devoted wife, smiling beside him, accepting compliments on my dress, my home, my husband. "Margaret, darling!" One of the senior partner's wives swooped in, air-kissing both my cheeks. "You look absolutely radiant. Doesn't she look radiant, Charles?" Charles slipped an arm around my waist, pulled me close in a possessive gesture. "She's the most beautiful woman here," he said smoothly. "I'm a lucky man." The irony was almost too much. In a few hours, he'd realize just how unlucky he actually was. I mingled, made small talk, drank champagne I couldn't taste. Across the room, I caught Marcus's eye. He gave me an almost imperceptible nod. Everything was in place. The district attorney's representatives were already in the building. The evidence had been delivered. All that remained was the reveal. At 8 p.m., exactly as planned, Marcus took the stage. He thanked everyone for coming, praised the firm's success, then made an announcement. "Before we continue, I need to address a serious matter. It's come to our attention that there have been financial irregularities within the firm. Out of an abundance of transparency and accountability, we've invited representatives from the district attorney's office to join us tonight to review our records." The room went silent. Charles's face drained of color. Brittany looked confused. And I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The silence was deafening. 500 people in formal wear, frozen mid-conversation, mid-sip, mid-laugh. The string quartet faltered to a stop. Someone dropped a glass, the sharp crack echoing through the ballroom. 2 men in suits entered through the side door. Marcus gestured them forward. "Charles Whitmore, these gentlemen need to speak with you regarding personal transactions that may have violated fiduciary duties to your clients and your family." The room erupted. Whispers turned to gasps. Phones came out. Charles looked at me, his eyes wide with panic and dawning realization. I took a sip of champagne, let him see the smile playing at my lips, and watched as his world collapsed in real time. "This is ridiculous," Charles sputtered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Marcus, what the hell are you doing? This is a mistake, a misunderstanding." He looked around the room, searching for allies, for support. But everyone had taken a step back, putting distance between themselves and the scandal unfolding before them. One of the men in suits spoke, his voice calm and professional. "Mr. Whitmore, we have evidence of financial fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. We'd like you to come with us to answer some questions. You have the right to contact an attorney." Charles's eyes found mine again, and this time there was something new in them. Understanding. He knew. Knew that I'd discovered everything. Knew that I'd been the one to expose him. "Margaret," he said, his voice breaking, "you did this. You." He couldn't seem to finish the sentence. "I protected myself," I said quietly. "I protected my father's legacy. I did what you should have done all along. I told the truth. They didn't arrest him there. That would come later, after the forensic accountants finished their work, after the indictments were filed. But they did escort him from the ballroom, past his clients, his colleagues, his mistress." Brittany tried to follow, but I caught her arm. "He's been stealing from me for years," I said quietly. "Using the money to fund his lifestyle, including you. I hope you kept receipts for the jewelry." Her face went pale. She stumbled away, and I didn't feel even a flicker of sympathy. The remaining guests were asked to leave. Marcus found me at the bar, ordered us both doubles. "You did it," he said. "You actually pulled it off." I clinked my glass against his. "We did it. Thank you for believing me." He shook his head. "I should thank you. He almost destroyed everything my father and I built. You saved the firm." We drank in silence, watching the servers clean up what should have been a celebration and had become a crime scene. I went home alone that night to the penthouse that would soon no longer be mine. But I didn't care. Material things could be replaced. Dignity, once stolen, was harder to reclaim. I stood at the window looking out at Lake Michigan, dark and vast under the stars. My phone buzzed with texts. Friends who'd seen the news already spreading across social media. "Are you okay?" they asked. "Do you need anything?" I typed back variations of the same response. "I'm better than okay. I'm free. Linda called at midnight crying. Margaret, oh my God, I just saw the news. Are you safe? Where are you? I'm coming over. I told her I was fine, that I was home, that I'd explain everything tomorrow. But hearing her voice, her genuine concern, broke something open inside me. I cried for the first time since the gala, great racking sobs that shook my whole body. Cried for the years I'd lost, for the woman I'd been forced to become, for the marriage that had been a lie from the start, and finally, cried tears of relief. It was over. The next morning, Charles's lawyers tried to contact me. I refused to speak with them, directing everything through my attorney. Within a week, the full scope of his crimes was public. The press had a field day. Prominent attorney accused of defrauding wife of millions. Financial fraud and marital betrayal. The Charles Whitmore case. I stayed off social media, ignored interview requests, and focused on the legal proceedings. Rebecca Chen became not just my attorney, but my anchor. She guided me through every step, explaining what was happening, what to expect, how to protect myself. You're going to get offers, she warned. Book deals, movie rights, interviews. My advice? Wait. Let the legal process play out. Then decide if you want to share your story. The media attention was overwhelming. Reporters camped outside the penthouse. My phone rang constantly with unknown numbers. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, some with genuine concern, others clearly hoping for gossip. I learned quickly who my real allies were. The trial took 8 months. 8 months of depositions, testimony, expert witnesses. I had to relive every manipulation, every forged signature, every lie. But I also got to watch as the prosecutors systematically dismantled Charles's defense. His lawyers tried to claim the transactions were legitimate, that I'd been aware and consenting. Then we produced the recordings, the forged documents, the tracker. The evidence was overwhelming. Sitting in that courtroom, watching Charles squirm under cross-examination, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, not joy, but a kind of sad relief. This man had been my husband for 20 years. We'd made vows, built a life together, even if that life had been built on lies. And now I was watching him destroy himself with his own arrogance and greed. The prosecution's forensic accountant testified for 3 days, walking the jury through every transaction, every forged signature, every hidden account. She was brilliant, methodical, impossible to refute. Charles's lawyer tried to discredit her, suggested that I'd orchestrated the fraud myself and was now blaming my husband. But the timeline didn't support it. The documentary evidence didn't support it. And when they played the recordings of Charles admitting to the sales, to the hidden accounts, his own words condemned him. I testified on the 7th day of the trial. Rebecca had prepared me extensively, coached me on how to stay calm, how to answer only what was asked, how to not let Charles's lawyer bait me into emotional outbursts. But when I took the stand and saw Charles sitting at the defense table, looking smaller somehow, diminished, I felt a wave of something I hadn't expected. Pity. The prosecutor asked me to describe my marriage, to explain how the financial abuse had developed over time, to detail the moment I'd found the tracker, the documents, the evidence of his crimes. I answered each question carefully, honestly keeping my voice steady even as I described the most painful moments. The isolation, the gaslighting, the systematic theft of everything my father had worked for. Charles's lawyer cross-examined me for hours, trying to paint me as a vindictive wife, a woman scorned who was exaggerating innocent mistakes into criminal fraud. Isn't it true, Mrs. Whitmore, that you never expressed any interest in managing finances? Isn't it true that you willingly signed joint account papers? Isn't it true that you're simply angry about your husband's relationship with Ms. Harrison? I answered each question calmly. Yes, I had signed papers. Papers I was told were tax documents. Papers that I trusted my husband to explain accurately. And no, this wasn't about the affair. This was about the systematic theft of millions of dollars, about forged signatures, about fraud. In the end, Charles Whitmore was convicted on 14 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution of $18 million. Every asset he'd hidden was seized. the offshore accounts, the properties, the investment portfolios. All of it returned to me with interest. My father's $12 million inheritance had grown to over $20 million through Charles's investments. The irony was perfect. He'd stolen my money and made me richer. The day of sentencing, I wore a simple black dress. No jewelry, no theatrics. I just wanted it to be over. The judge was a woman in her 60s, stern and sharp-eyed. She'd heard every argument, reviewed every piece of evidence. When she delivered the sentence, she looked directly at Charles. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "you are an educated man, an attorney who swore an oath to uphold the law. You violated that oath in the most egregious way possible. You betrayed your wife, your partner, your clients, and the legal profession. You showed no remorse, no accountability, even when faced with overwhelming evidence of your crimes. The sentence of this court reflects not just the severity of your actions, but your complete lack of character." Charles didn't react, just stood there staring straight ahead as the bailiffs approached to take him into custody. As they led him away, he turned one last time to look at me. I met his eyes, held his gaze, and then turned away. I didn't need to say anything. It was all already said. Brittany lost her job, her reputation, her future in the legal profession. The firm survived thanks to Marcus's quick action, but Charles's name was erased from every door, every document, every piece of marketing material. He became a cautionary tale, a lesson in greed and hubris. And I became something I'd never been before: independent, wealthy in my own right, unafraid. But here's what I want you to understand, and this is important. The money didn't heal me. Justice didn't erase 20 years of manipulation and control. I still had to do the work of rebuilding my sense of self. I spent a year in therapy, unpacking the patterns that had made me vulnerable to Charles in the first place. I learned about financial abuse, about coercive control, about the ways abusers systematically dismantle their victims' autonomy. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Winters, became instrumental in my recovery. In our first session, she asked me to describe myself without reference to Charles, to my marriage, to my father, to anyone else. I couldn't do it. I'd spent so long defining myself in relation to others that I didn't know who Margaret was on her own. "We're going to rebuild your identity," Sarah said gently. "From the ground up. You're going to discover who you are, what you want, what makes you happy. And it's going to be hard, because you've spent 20 years being told you're not enough, that you're not smart enough, capable enough, worthy enough. We're going to dismantle those lies." It took months of painful sessions where I confronted the girl who'd married Charles at 25, desperate for security after growing up with an immigrant father who worked himself to exhaustion, who'd equated love with protection, safety with control, who'd believed that giving up her autonomy was a fair trade for financial stability. "You weren't weak," Sarah told me. "You were young, and he was a predator who saw your vulnerability and exploited it. That's on him, not you." Financial abuse is insidious because it's hidden. There are no bruises, no obvious scars, but it's devastatingly effective. The abuser controls all the money, makes all the decisions, and creates a dependency that feels impossible to escape. They often start small, offering to help with finances, then gradually taking over completely. They might restrict access to accounts, require approval for purchases, or keep their partner in the dark about the family's true financial situation. Over time, the victim loses confidence in their ability to manage money, sometimes loses access to their own income or inheritance. They become economically trapped, unable to leave even if they want to. If you're reading this and it sounds familiar, please know you're not stupid, you're not weak, you're dealing with someone who is systematically exploiting your trust. Here's what you can do. First, document everything. Keep records of financial transactions, emails, texts. Open a separate bank account if possible, even if it's just for small amounts. Consult with a financial advisor or attorney who specializes in these cases. Many offer free initial consultations. Reach out to organizations that help victims of financial abuse. They can provide resources, support, and practical advice for protecting yourself and your assets. And remember, leaving is dangerous. Abusers often escalate when they sense they're losing control. So plan carefully, build your evidence quietly. Don't confront until you're ready to leave and have legal protection in place. I was lucky. I had resources, education, and eventually, allies like Marcus. But not everyone does. And that's okay. There are people who will help. You just have to reach out. Today I live in a smaller place, a brownstone in Lincoln Park, with a garden where I grow tomatoes and herbs. I volunteer with an organization that helps women escape financial abuse. I've reconnected with old friends, made new ones, built a life that's mine. I think about Charles sometimes, locked away in his cell, stripped of everything he valued. Do I feel guilty? No. He made his choices. He faces the consequences. The brownstone is a fraction of the size of the penthouse, but it feels like home in a way that cavernous apartment never did. I picked out every piece of furniture myself, chose the paint colors, planted the garden with my own hands. Every morning I make coffee and sit in my small backyard, watching the sunrise, listening to the birds. It's simple. It's mine. It's enough. The first night I spent in this house, I cried. Not from sadness, but from relief so profound it felt physical. I walked through each room, touching the walls, the door frames, the windows, claiming the space as mine. No one to tell me the furniture was wrong. No one to criticize my choices. No one monitoring my movements or controlling my decisions. Just me, alone, free, terrified, and exhilarated. I started small with reclaiming my life. The first week, I bought myself flowers. Bright sunflowers that Charles would have said clashed with the decor. I put them in a mason jar on my kitchen table and smiled every time I saw them. The second week, I stayed up until 3 a.m. reading a novel just because I could. No one to complain about the light. No one to question my choices. The third week, I went to a movie alone, something I'd never done in my marriage. Sat in the theater with popcorn and soda and watched a romantic comedy Charles would have scoffed at. And I laughed, really laughed for the first time in years. The volunteer work has become my passion. I speak to women who are trapped the way I was, help them understand that they're not alone, that there's a way out. I've helped 7 women leave abusive situations in the past year, helped them open bank accounts, file police reports, find lawyers. Every time I see one of them take that first step toward freedom, I feel like I'm honoring my father's legacy in a way he would have been truly proud of. Just last month, a woman named Sarah came to one of our support group meetings. She was 42, married for 18 years, and described a situation almost identical to mine. Her husband controlled all the finances, told her she was bad with money, made her feel stupid for asking questions. She'd found discrepancies in their accounts but was terrified to investigate further. As she spoke, I saw myself 5 years ago. Scared, confused, convinced I was the problem. I took her to coffee afterward, told her my story, showed her the resources available, gave her Rebecca Chen's card. 3 weeks later, Sarah called me crying. She'd found the evidence. Her husband had been stealing from her for over a decade. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice breaking. "How did you find the courage?" "You already have the courage," I told her. "You found the truth. You reached out. You're asking for help. That's courage. The rest is just steps, one at a time. And you don't have to take them alone." Today, Sarah is building her own case, documenting, planning, preparing, and when she's ready, when she has everything in place, she'll make her move, just like I did. And another woman will reclaim her life, her identity, her father's legacy, or whatever it is she's fighting for. That's the ripple effect of courage. It spreads. I've also learned to forgive myself for being trusting, for missing the signs, for staying so long. Abuse doesn't happen because the victim is foolish. It happens because the abuser is skilled at manipulation. And healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means integrating the experience, learning from it, and moving forward stronger. There are still hard days. Days when I see a couple walking hand in hand and feel a pang of loneliness. Days when I second-guess my decisions. Wonder if I could have handled things differently. Days when the weight of what I lost, not the money but the dreams, the years, the future I'd imagined, feels crushing. On those days, I visit my father's grave. I sit beside his headstone and tell him everything. About Charles, about the fraud, about how I fought back and won. And I imagine him proud of me, not for the money I reclaimed, but for the strength I found, for refusing to stay a victim, for honoring his legacy by refusing to let it be stolen. Sometimes Linda joins me there. We bring flowers and coffee and sit in the peaceful cemetery, talking about everything and nothing. She was there through it all, my one constant friend when I had nothing and no one. "You're the bravest person I know," she told me once. I laughed. I was terrified every single day. She smiled. "That's what makes it brave. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it." So here's my question for you. Wherever you are, whatever time it is in your part of the world, if you've made it this far, if this story resonated, I want to hear from you. What city are you listening from? Have you experienced financial abuse? Or do you know someone who has? What would you have done in my situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe Margaret did the right thing, if you support women reclaiming their power and their assets, hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories of survival and justice. I'll be sharing another story next week. This one about a woman who discovered her sister had been stealing her identity for years. You won't want to miss it. Until then, take care of your heart, protect your assets, and remember, you are never as trapped as someone wants you to believe. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.